That suitcase isn't yours. His voice cut through the airport noise like a sharp snap. Sarah froze, holding Ethan tightly against her chest, his little body hot and restless as she reached for her faded yellow suitcase on the baggage carousel. A man in a dark suit with a hard stare gripped the bag like he owned it. Without asking for an explanation, he threw her a look of disdain and added, "No, don't touch it." The baby stirred in her arms and whimpered, sensing the tension crackling in the air. "But it is mine. Look, the tag." Sarah tried to explain, pulling the claim slip from her pocket with one hand, while the other supported her limp, feverish baby. The man cut her off with a cold look, like he'd already decided she was just another scammer trying to take advantage of the baggage chaos. "Are you trying to cash in on the confusion?" Her face flushed, not with guilt, but with humiliation. Her chest tightened with shame, and with it the fear of losing the only thing she had left. That suitcase was everything. Inside were the last pieces of her mother, the woman she'd just buried. She couldn't even feel her legs anymore. Pride had long since vanished. She was exhausted, starving, emotionally drained, and now accused of stealing in front of strangers who just stood and watched. But when the man turned the luggage tag and noticed something small and blue hanging from the zipper, his expression shifted. Those icy eyes began to flicker, as if a name written there had pierced through some long-locked part of his past. Mitchell. He stepped back, face a little pale. Mitchell, Evelyn Mitchell. If this story already touched your heart, hit that subscribe button, like the video, and share it with someone who believes that even the most unexpected encounters happen for a reason. And stay till the end, because something inside that suitcase is about to change everything. Sarah clutched the baggage slip like a paper shield, her breathing rapid. Ethan whimpered softly in her arms, his feverish head resting against her chest. The man was still holding the suitcase tightly, as if the name Mitchell wasn't enough, as if the pain written all over her face was some kind of performance. People moved around them, carrying on with their day, but for Sarah, time had stopped. "I'm not trying to trick you. This is my suitcase. Here's the number, the receipt, look." She held out the crumpled paper, her fingers damp with sweat and dust. His eyes scanned the claim tag like he was trying to crack a code. Sarah felt her throat tighten. This wasn't just about a piece of luggage. It was about not being believed, about being judged, for being poor, for holding a baby in stained clothes, for simply existing. "So what's in there that's so valuable?" His voice was still cold, and that's when Sarah broke. "What's left of my mother?" The words came out raw, cutting through the air like a blade. The suitcase held a scarf that still smelled like her, letters Sarah had written as a teenager but never sent, a pair of vintage earrings, and $300 Evelyn had hidden away as one last act of care. How was she supposed to explain all that without sounding pathetic? His eyes faltered. For the first time, he loosened his grip on the handle, just slightly, like her words had sunk into his skin. Sarah hugged Ethan closer. Her heart was pounding. Every part of her was begging for one drop of compassion, but she was so tired of begging. "I just buried my mum in Detroit. I don't even know how I'm getting back home. I just want my suitcase, sir. That's all." David looked back at the carousel, finally noticing another suitcase rolling toward them. Same color, same model. He grabbed it and checked the tag. Anderson, D. A heavy silence hung between them. Sarah looked away, not even hoping for an apology anymore. A security guard approached, picking up on the tension. "Is there a problem here?" With his usual air of authority, David took a breath and spoke before Sarah could answer. "No, just a mix-up. That suitcase is hers." Sarah lowered her eyes, but couldn't stop a single tear from slipping down her cheek. The guard walked away, and David stood there, unsure how to fix what he'd just broken. She looked fragile, but proud, humiliated, yet dignified. And somehow, that contrast shook him. I'm sorry. I really am. I was wrong. Can I do something to make up for it? She gave a half smile, bitter and tired. Can you go back in time? David didn't answer. His eyes dropped to the blue keychain on her suitcase. The name Mitchell burned in his mind. A piece of the past he thought was long gone was breathing right in front of him again. And maybe that's why. Maybe because of something deeper he didn't yet understand. His next words came out low, but certain. I knew an Evelyn Mitchell. A long time ago. Without Sarah even noticing, David slipped his phone out of his pocket, pulled up his photo gallery, and tapped on an old picture. When he showed it to her, Sarah froze. That's my mom. How do you have this picture? Sarah Mitchell learned early on that the world didn't have room for dreamers. Even as a little girl, she watched her mother fold laundry in silence, while her father disappeared for days without a word. When she got pregnant with Ethan at 22, she swore things would be different. But lonely promises don't always stand a chance against reality. Her husband's sudden death in a car crash had thrown her into a grief so heavy it was invisible. And from that moment on, survival became her only routine. She worked as a clerk at a local laundromat, cleaned houses 3 times a week, and sold handmade bracelets on the subway every Sunday. She carried Ethan in a cheap sling, her body constantly aching, feet nearly always damp from the rain. She woke before the sun and collapsed long after midnight. There was no luxury, no rest, but there was love, deep, fierce love. And that love made her smile every time her baby babbled sweet sounds while nursing. Her bond with her mother, Evelyn, had always been built on silent understanding. Evelyn didn't say much, but she did everything. She looked after Ethan while Sarah worked, and she still made breakfast, even when her own health had already started fading. When Evelyn passed, a victim of fast-moving, silent cancer, Sarah buried her only lifeline. And with her, the last piece of home. At the bottom of that yellow suitcase were letters Evelyn had written for Ethan, photos from Sarah's childhood, and even a little jar of her mother's perfume. That's what Sarah was trying to protect. It was never about the suitcase. It was about what it meant, a piece of a life that no longer existed, and now, being challenged by a stranger in an airport, she felt violated all over again, by life and by pain. As David watched her in silence across the terminal, Sarah rocked Ethan gently in her arms. The baby hiccuped softly, his eyes red with exhaustion. She adjusted the little cloth on his neck and sat down slowly. Her body begged for rest, but her mind stayed alert. Always. That name? Mitchell. I saw something about your family. Years ago. David had said it like he was talking to a memory. Sarah just looked up. It wasn't the first time someone seemed to recognize her last name, but she'd never paid much attention. To her, it was just a name, nothing more. She had no idea that for David, that name held old cracks. While he spoke little but watched closely, Sarah wondered what he was hiding beneath all that formality. He was cold, but not cruel, rigid, but not heartless. Something about him felt conflicted. She noticed the little things, how he handed her a water bottle without asking, how he tucked Ethan's blanket with too much care. David suggested they have dinner at the hotel restaurant. She hesitated, but one look at her baby convinced her. Ethan needed real food, and so did she. They sat at a table off to the side, surrounded by people in sharp suits and elegant dresses. Sarah felt the waiters' glances, but chose to ignore them. She ordered mashed vegetables from the kids' menu and fed Ethan slowly, while David watched in silence. "You've always lived in Detroit?" he asked, almost casually. "Yeah, born and raised, and barely made it out, at least for now." Her smile was brief, but heavy with pain. And once again, David felt that this young woman was stronger than she looked. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he wanted to understand her. When Sarah stood up to change Ethan's diaper, a photo slipped from David's wallet. She bent down to hand it back and froze when she saw the face in the picture. "That's my mom. Why do you have a photo of my mom?" The storm started as a whisper, first in the sky, then in the airport speakers. All flights to Detroit are temporarily suspended. Sarah sat in a quiet corner of the terminal, Ethan asleep in her lap, his warm cheek pressed against her chest, breathing uneven. His feverish body radiated heat, and she could no longer tell what was sweat and what was tears. The thin cloth covering him was damp, and the milk in the makeshift bottle no longer calmed him. She dug through her coat pockets, searching for change, only to find crumpled notes and the baggage claim slip. Her hands trembled as she opened a pack of crackers. Her eyes scanned the space around her, looking for solutions where there were none. She had nowhere to go, no one to call. Even the cheapest airport motel cost more than everything she had. And Ethan was getting worse. Labored breaths, flushed cheeks, whimpers that came and went. David reappeared carrying a pharmacy bag and a bottle of warm water. His fever's climbing. "I got a room. They said it was a complimentary upgrade." He was lying. Obviously. Sarah knew, but she was too tired to argue. She just nodded, clutching Ethan close. Her eyes were bloodshot, but there were no tears left, only urgency. In the hotel room, with the air conditioning off and soft yellow lighting, Sarah laid Ethan on the bed and slowly peeled off his damp onesie. David handed her a thermometer. The baby groaned faintly, his legs twitching. The fever was high. Sarah dabbed his forehead with a wet cloth and watched him, silently praying. "You knew exactly what to bring," David replied without looking up. "When you're the oldest kid in an orphanage, you learn to take care of the little ones. Even when you're still just a kid yourself." That sentence wouldn't leave her mind. David sat by the window, staring out at the rain. For the first time, Sarah didn't see a CEO. She saw a lost boy. Maybe they weren't so different after all. One had been left in an orphanage, the other in a home with an open door, but too many absences. Both were forced to grow up far too soon. She walked over to the nightstand to grab Ethan's bottle and noticed a photo lying on the floor, probably from David's wallet. She picked it up to return it, and froze. It was her mother, younger, smiling by a wooden fence. On the back, in handwritten ink, "Evelyn Mitchell, 1989. Sarah's body trembled. A lump formed in her throat. How did a man like David Anderson, a billionaire used to private jets, big numbers and boardrooms, carry an old photo of Evelyn? "Where did you get this?" The question came out like a hoarse whisper. David turned slowly, his face darkening as he saw the picture in her hands. For a moment, there were no walls, no titles, no money, just two people, connected by a past neither of them fully understood yet. David swallowed hard and stepped closer. "That photo was given to me years ago, but I never really knew who she was." Sarah stepped back, tightening her grip around Ethan. Every part of her warned something wasn't right. But just as deeply, she needed to understand. She had to know what he was hiding. While the baby slept, Sarah stayed up all night staring at the same photo. When dawn broke, David stood by the window with an envelope in hand. He took a deep breath and said, "Sarah, I need to tell you what I know about your mother, and why this story still haunts me to this day." Sarah held Ethan tightly in her arms as she watched David place the envelope on the table. The silence between them felt thick, packed with words neither of them knew how to say yet. The photo of her mother, creased at the edges, worn with time, now felt heavier than ever. Sarah could sense that something bigger was behind all of this. But part of her didn't want to know. She was afraid of what else she might lose. "She took care of me. Once for a few weeks, I was just a lost kid, ran away from the orphanage. She gave me shelter, food, and then she disappeared. David spoke like someone reliving memories through smells, cold nights, and hunger. Sarah listened in silence, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. The image she had of her mother was changing, gaining new, unexpected layers. She'd never known this chapter of Evelyn's life. Even though her heart was pounding, Sarah knew life wouldn't wait for her to process it all. Ethan was still sick, and her wallet was down to its last coins. At sunrise, she pulled out her old phone and searched for any job in Chicago, where they were still stuck because of the storm. She found a listing for a night shift cleaning position at a hospital. She didn't even have time to think. She applied. David walked into the room soon after, already dressed for a meeting. He noticed Sarah's distant gaze and gently asked, "Do you need help?" She didn't answer right away. She was tired of hearing advice from people who'd never known what it was like to wake up hungry and fall asleep in debt. But something in his eyes, vulnerable, human, made her let her guard down just a little. "If you know anyone hiring, anything that lets me still care for Ethan, I'll take it." David took a breath. "I do know someone." She raised her eyebrows. "Who?" "Me." Sarah let out a short, almost sarcastic laugh. "You want to hire me? Out of pity?" "No, out of respect." David's gaze didn't waver. "I need someone trustworthy to help with the admin side of a new social project. And honestly, I think you understand humanity better than most execs on my team." The offer echoed in Sarah's head for hours. Her pride screamed no, but the hunger, Ethan's fever, and the weight of starting from scratch were begging her to say yes. That night she found him in the hotel lobby. Ethan was asleep, wrapped in a makeshift blanket. Sarah walked up slowly and said, "I'll take it, but I want to be treated like everyone else. No favors, no pity." David nodded. "Then welcome to the team, Sarah Mitchell." On her first day at work, while organizing old company files, Sarah came across a folder with a familiar name. When she opened it, she uncovered a dark secret, one tied to her mother, and to the very origin of David's fortune. The office was as silent as it was intimidating. Polished floors, glass walls, staff dressed in perfectly pressed clothes with robotic elegance. Sarah walked in with Ethan in her arms, scanning the space like someone stepping into enemy territory. Her brand-new badge felt heavy around her neck, but when she spotted David offering her a discreet smile from across the room, something inside her softened. There was relief in that smile, and maybe something more. Bit by bit, Sarah began learning the rhythm of the company. She handled spreadsheets, scheduled meetings, answered overdue emails. Nothing glamorous, but unlike her past jobs, here there was silence, hot coffee, and respect. At first, David kept some distance, like he was giving her the space she needed to trust him. And Sarah, she didn't trust easily, but she started to hear meaning in his silences, like background music playing between the lines. One afternoon, David showed up in the break room with 2 lunch containers. He placed one in front of her and said, "Saw you eating crackers yesterday. That's not lunch." She raised an eyebrow. "Since when do CEOs care what janitors, ex-janitors, eat?" He shrugged. "Since I realized empathy can be more profitable than arrogance." Ethan now spent his mornings in a daycare built on the ground floor of the building, discreet, modern. Sarah found out days later that David had personally funded it. She confronted him, furious. "Are you trying to buy my gratitude?" David answered plainly, "No, I'm trying to make sure you can work with peace of mind." For the first time, she didn't have a response. As the weeks passed, the 2 of them started having lunch together more often. The short conversations turned into real talks. She opened up about sleepless nights, dreams she buried with her husband, and the guilt she felt for still wanting more out of life. David listened, and in return he shared pieces of his own childhood, the loneliness disguised as success, the emptiness after each contract signed. One night, after a successful event Sarah had helped coordinate, David took her to a quiet bistro by the river. They laughed like old friends, not a billionaire and an ex-cleaning lady. Afterward, he walked her to the subway station in silence. When she turned to say goodbye, he gently touched her hand. "You brought color into a place that only knew routine." Sarah looked away, her heart racing. She didn't say a word, but something in that touch, subtle, sincere, spoke louder than anything else. She left feeling like, for the first time in years, someone truly saw her. Not with pity, not with judgment, just saw her. The next morning, when she got to work, she found a flower taped to her monitor with a simple note. "For the woman who turned my grey into light." Sarah smiled. And deep down, she knew something inside her was shifting, even if she didn't realize it yet. But everything begins to crack the moment a figure from David's past walks into the company's lobby. Flawless, commanding, and carrying news that could destroy everything he and Sarah had built. The morning was overcast, as if the sky already knew what was about to happen. Sarah stood at the company's front desk, signing a contract for a new project, with Ethan calmly resting in his car seat beside her. She smiled, remembering the night before, the note, the flower. There was a quiet light growing inside her. But that light vanished the moment the revolving door revealed the silhouette of a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion editorial. Stiletto heels, hair perfectly pinned up, and eyes cold as cut glass. Victoria Sterling. The name echoed down the hallway before she even said a word. David's ex-fiancée, socialite, entrepreneur, a storm wrapped in charm and control. She strode across the lobby like she still owned the place, completely ignoring Sarah until she stopped in front of David, an envelope in hand and a venomous smile on her lips. "We need to talk. It's about the baby." Sarah didn't hear the rest of the conversation, but she saw David's face go pale. The exchange lasted 5 minutes, just enough time to undo months of emotional rebuilding. When he returned to the conference room, Sarah was already there, waiting for an explanation. "She says she's pregnant, and the baby's mine." The words hit her like a silent lightning strike to the chest. Sarah didn't respond. She just nodded, like someone trying to stay upright after being knocked off their feet. She tried to finish the day, but it felt like walking with sand in her lungs. Once again, she felt like she didn't belong. Worse, she felt foolish. How could she have dared to believe she belonged in that world? A world where ex-fiancés showed up with millionaire babies, and she was still just the girl with the yellow suitcase. By the end of the afternoon, she didn't return to the office. She grabbed Ethan and headed to the small room she'd rented on the outskirts of the city, a modest space, but one that smelled like freedom. That evening, David knocked on her door. He looked visibly shaken. "I didn't know. She disappeared for months. Said she needed to move on. I need time to figure out if it's even true." Sarah met his eyes, hers already filled with tears. "Time's something I don't have, David. And trust, that's something you just broke." She didn't scream. She didn't make a scene. It was the quiet pain that cut the deepest. "You think this is about jealousy. This is about knowing I'll always be the exception, and she'll always be the rule." David took a step forward, but Sarah stepped back. "You'll never be able to love someone like me without the world constantly reminding you that I'll never be enough." That night, she wrote a letter. Short. No drama. It simply said she had to go, for Ethan and for herself. That she loved what they had, but she couldn't live on halves. She left the letter at the company front desk along with her ID badge, and she walked away with her baby in her arms, just like the first day. Alone, but different. Stronger. More hurt. Days later, David found a lead on Sarah's whereabouts, but when he finally reached her, what he saw would leave him speechless. Because this time, she was the one fighting for her life. The little town where Sarah had taken refuge barely registered on the map. It was surrounded by low trees, simple homes, and a 24-hour diner where she worked, serving coffee and wiping down tables. The air was cleaner. The silence ran deeper. And still, the emptiness inside her roared louder than ever. Every time she changed Ethan's diaper or warmed a bottle in the restaurant microwave, she felt a deep ache for the life she'd almost had, but never fully lived. The makeshift bed they shared was small, but comforting. Ethan's health was stabilizing, but he still woke up crying in the middle of the night. Sarah rocked him gently, sometimes crying along with him, so softly he wouldn't notice. She felt split in half, torn between the logic that brought her here and the love she'd left behind. But she didn't regret it. For the first time, she was standing on her own. She still kept her mother's photo in her wallet, and sometimes reread the notes Evelyn had tucked away in that old suitcase. They were letters of love, of advice, of quiet strength. In one of them, Evelyn had written, "If love makes you scared, maybe it's not love yet, but if it gives you courage, stay." Sarah folded the paper gently, wondering when exactly she'd lost her courage. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, David wasn't sitting still. He'd hired private investigators, not just out of desperation, but because in silence, he was beginning to unravel everything he thought he knew. After confronting Victoria, he demanded a DNA test. The truth came fast. The baby wasn't his. She had made it all up, either to win him back or just to stop him from being happy with someone else. Sarah had no idea about this twist. All she knew was a bone-deep exhaustion, as if she was aging 10 years every week. Working nights and caring for Ethan during the day was draining her. But she didn't complain. There was something noble in honest work, and in a strange way, she was starting to recognize herself in the mirror again. One morning, as she stepped out of the diner after a long shift, she spotted a black car parked down the street. She knew that silhouette from a distance. David. Her heart raced, but her feet stayed planted. He stepped out of the car slowly without his usual swagger. "Are you okay?" Sarah didn't answer. She just looked at him for a long time, trying to figure out if this was an apology or a new beginning. "I didn't come to take you back. I came to say I'm sorry, and to thank you." She raised an eyebrow. "Thank me? For what?" "For showing me that love can't be bought, and that I have to earn every part of it." Sarah stayed skeptical, but something in his voice was different, less urgent, more real. "I don't have any answers for you right now. I'm not asking for answers. I just want to be around, if you'll let me." She swallowed hard. For the first time, someone wasn't asking anything of her, just presence. But that same night, Ethan began vomiting and running a high fever. Sarah rushed him to the local emergency room. The doctors exchanged worried glances. "He needs emergency surgery." "And we don't have much time." Sarah ran through the hospital hallways with Ethan limp in her arms. The baby burned with fever, eyes half open, groaning in pain. The front desk clerk warned her the facility wasn't equipped to handle what looked like internal complications. An ambulance was called immediately. David showed up minutes later, pale, breathless, like he'd sprinted for miles. When he saw her there, sitting on the floor wrapped in panic, he sat beside her. He didn't say a word. He just held her hand. At the city's central hospital, the tests began in a rush. Doctors moved in and out of the exam room with tense, urgent expressions. One of them approached, and Sarah had to grip the back of a chair to keep from collapsing. "The baby needs surgery to correct a rare malformation. He'll also need transfusions, and possibly a bone marrow transplant." The word hit like a sentence. Transplant. Rare. Urgent. Sarah was trembling. "We've checked the National Registry, but there are no compatible donors." The nurse bit her lip, like she was holding on to one last sliver of hope. "We could test you, sir. Immediate relatives are usually our best chance." Sarah looked up. He's not family. Without a moment's pause, David said, "Test me anyway." Hours later, the results came back. The doctors pulled David and Sarah aside for a private conversation. The physician looked nervous, but she was smiling. "David's a match. And not just that, the test shows he shares a significant number of genetic markers with Ethan, way more than we'd expect from someone unrelated." Sarah's brows knit together. "What does that mean?" The doctor hesitated before answering. "We ran a deeper test. David is biologically related to you. You both share the same father." The world stopped. Sarah turned to David, who sank into his chair. His eyes filled with tears, and his breathing became shallow. That can't be true." The next few hours were a whirlwind of silence, more tests and truths that cut like knives. The reality was stranger than fiction. David had been adopted as a baby and raised believing he was an orphan. But DNA doesn't lie. He and Sarah were children of the same man, Thomas Mitchell, a businessman who had abandoned Sarah as a child, and David before he was even born. Now, without knowing, they were connected by blood. Sarah felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. Everything they'd lived, the pain, the budding love, the longing, the moments with Ethan, now swirled into a fog of shame, disbelief, and confusion. David looked just as broken. "I didn't know, Sarah. I swear on everything, I didn't know." But there was no undoing what had been felt. And at the same time, none of it changed what Ethan needed most right now: life. Later that evening, while Sarah watched the doctors prep her baby for surgery, David held her hand. "It doesn't matter what we are. What matters is that he gets better." And in that moment, no longer bound by romance but by blood, two children once rejected by the same father stood side by side, fighting to save the baby who had brought them together. But just when everything seemed settled, a new test came in, and this time the results would change everything, because David might not be Thomas's son after all. Ethan's surgery was a success. The baby now slept peacefully in a special incubator, hooked up to monitors, but out of danger. Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the glass. Even exhausted, with her hair pulled back in a rush and dark circles under her eyes, she looked like a living statue of devotion. David was there too, silent, still, but inside they were both falling apart. That afternoon the doctor walked in with another envelope. Her restless eyes said more than words could. "We accessed the old records from the clinic that ran the previous test, and we found an error." Sarah stood up, her heart racing. "An error?" "Yes, David's genetic markers match Ethan's, but not Thomas Mitchell's." Silence. "David isn't Thomas's son. Sarah is." David staggered. The ground beneath him seemed to tilt. Everything that had held him together until now shattered. Sarah's body trembled. It was a strange relief. They weren't siblings, but also it meant that everything they'd believed was built on a lie told by strangers and kept alive by absence. The next day, a man showed up at the hospital door. Tall, grey hair, neatly combed, dark suit, and eyes carrying more weight than one heart should hold. It was him, Thomas Mitchell, the father Sarah had never met, and until now, the man David believed was his too. "I had to see you with my own eyes." Thomas's voice was firm, but there was a tremor beneath it. "Sarah, please forgive me." She stood tall, fists clenched. "You left us. Me, my mother, and David wasn't even your son, but you disappeared anyway." David, standing quietly beside her, felt the wound reopen. "Then who am I? Who was my mother? Why did I grow up believing I was your son?" Thomas lowered his head. "You were kidnapped, a dark twist in a case that got buried. The woman who raised you claimed I betrayed her, but she wasn't well. She disappeared with you when you were a baby. I never knew where you'd gone." The truth hit David like acid rain. His entire story, his identity, was a fabrication. Sarah didn't move closer. It was too soon for forgiveness. But at that moment she no longer saw Thomas as a father, only as the embodiment of everything that had been missing. You want redemption? Start not with promises. Start with truth. And she turned her back on him. David followed her. They left Thomas standing in the hallway, caught between the past and the pieces he could never fully put back together. In the days that followed, one last DNA test was run between David and Ethan, and it revealed something even more unbelievable. They did share blood, but the connection was something else entirely. The sun rose slowly that morning, as if time itself was asking permission to move forward. Sarah sat beside Ethan's incubator, gently tracing the glass with her fingers. The baby slept peacefully, color returning to his cheeks. For the first time in days, she breathed without fear. Everything around her felt suspended, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for her next move. But Sarah, she wasn't the same anymore. David approached quietly, his face a mix of guilt and hope. In his hands, he held a new genetic report. He sat beside her and placed the envelope on the table. Ethan, he's part of my family. Sarah looked at him silently. What do you mean? I'm a blood cousin of his father, the man who died in the accident. That's why the DNA matched. The revelation left Sarah stunned. It wasn't a coincidence, it was fate, stitched silently into the background of their lives. So that means you were part of my story all along? David nodded. And maybe that's why I could never walk away. Because deep down, I knew you and Ethan were home. Thomas Mitchell confirmed everything. Sarah was, in fact, his biological daughter. And David, while never related to Thomas, was part of the bloodline of the man she once loved and lost, Ethan's father. It was as if fate had tied them together through shared pain and a chance at redemption. Now, with the truth laid bare, there was room to rebuild, not with fantasies, but with real roots. Sarah spent weeks reflecting. Forgiveness wasn't easy, trust even less so, but there was something about David that didn't fade, his consistency. He stayed. When she ran, he searched. When Ethan fell ill, he didn't hesitate. When everything shattered, he stood among the broken pieces. And that said more than any apology ever could. 1 month later, with a healthy Ethan in her arms, Sarah walked back into the company building. This time, the employees greeted her with a different kind of respect, not as an assistant, but as someone who had survived. David waited in the conference room with a brown envelope. I want you to lead our new social projects division. She smiled, visibly moved. And I want to accept, but on one condition. David tilted his head, surprised. What condition? That decisions are made together, as equals, because I'm not here to be rescued, I'm here to build. He reached out his hand. Then let's build. That night, Ethan slept between them on the couch in their new home. Sarah stared at the ceiling, thinking, maybe love isn't a fairy tale. Maybe it's just this, two survivors choosing to walk side by side, not in spite of their scars, but because of them. 2 years later, at the same airport where it all began, a suitcase hits the ground, and a new story is about to begin, this time in different hands. 2 years had passed since that night at the hospital. Chicago O'Hare International Airport looked the same chill at the glass doors, same hurried lines, same mechanical announcements echoing overhead. But to Sarah, everything had changed. She now held Ethan's hand as he took his first steps, his curly hair bouncing with each wobbly stride. Underneath her light dress, a small baby bump showed. She was pregnant with twins, married, at peace. David walked beside her, pushing a luggage cart with 2 brand-new suitcases. The scene looked ordinary, but it held a promise fulfilled. They had just returned from Paris, where they spent their honeymoon. It all felt like a full circle, until fate whispered once more near the baggage carousel. A young woman, alone, was struggling to hold her baby while pulling a suitcase that looked way too big for her. Sarah stopped. She didn't think. She just walked toward the girl, her heart pounding with a muscle memory of pain. "Here, let me help you with that." The woman, startled at first, nodded with teary eyes. David grabbed the suitcase with ease, while Sarah cradled the baby in her arms like he was her own. It felt like the past was being rewritten, right there, in real time. The young woman thanked them softly and admitted she was running from an abusive relationship, that everything she and her baby had was in that one suitcase. Sarah gripped her hand tightly. "You're not alone." And David, with a gentle smile, added, "Please, let me help." That sentence echoed in Sarah's heart like a cymbal. It was exactly what he hadn't said the first time. And now he said it with truth. They weren't the same people anymore. They'd learned to love without trying to fix, to care without controlling, to serve without expecting anything in return. They had become the adults they once wished had been there when their world fell apart. As they walked out of the terminal, the imaginary camera would pull back slowly, revealing the newly unveiled building that opened that very week, Mitchell Anderson Family Support Center, a project they funded together, created to support emotionally and financially vulnerable families at major airports. Where once there was humiliation, now there was shelter. Ethan ran up to hug his mum, proudly wearing a little name tag that read, "I'm part of this story." Sarah smiled. David wrapped his arms around her from behind, and in that silent embrace there was more than love. There was purpose, because sometimes the most unexpected encounters are the ones that save us. Tell us in the comments, what part of this story touched you the most? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional stories like this one.